In an Egypt filled with riches and power, there was a man named Potiphar, an official of the Pharaoh, commander of the guard, and a man of great influence. He was respected and feared, and his house, one of the most majestic in the land, was a symbol of his status. Yet, amidst all this splendor, Potiphar felt an emptiness he could not fill. He longed for something more meaningful, something that would bring purpose to his life. One morning, upon arriving at the palace, Potiphar encountered a young Hebrew named Joseph, who had been sold into slavery by his own brothers. The young man's appearance was striking, and his eyes shone with an unusual intelligence. As Potiphar observed Joseph at work, he noticed something extraordinary. Everything the young man touched prospered. Joseph had a special ability, a blessing that emanated from him, as if God was by his side. Potiphar decided to trust Joseph, assigning him the administration of his house. However, over time, Potiphar's tranquil life would be shaken. His wife, drawn to the beauty and charisma of the young Hebrew, began to harbor a forbidden passion. Joseph, loyal and upright, rejected her advances, but Potiphar's wife's desire for his presence grew stronger each day. Tension began to build. Potiphar, aware that his wife was watching him with longing eyes, felt increasingly vulnerable. The trust he had in Joseph became a weight in his heart. As a man of honor, Potiphar struggled between his loyalty to the young Hebrew and his devotion to his wife. The situation was becoming increasingly untenable, and a great conflict loomed. Life in Potiphar's house grew increasingly tense. Potiphar's wife, becoming more obsessed with Joseph, could not contain her desire. One afternoon, when Potiphar was away, she decided to put her plan into action. With a seductive smile, she called Joseph to help her with some tasks in the room. The atmosphere was charged with unusual energy, and Joseph, aware of his position, tried to maintain his composure. "Joseph, you have no idea how much I admire your skill and strength," she began, her voice soft and persuasive. "Why don't we take advantage of this moment alone?" Joseph felt the weight of temptation, but the memory of his honor and loyalty to Potiphar kept him from yielding. "Madam, I cannot do this. My master has trusted me, and I cannot betray that trust," he replied firmly, trying to maintain his dignity. Frustrated and furious with the rejection, Potiphar's wife decided that she would not let Joseph escape so easily. That very day, as he tried to pull away, she grabbed him by his cloak, pulling him closer. "Come, Joseph, no one needs to know. It's just the two of us, and what's wrong with enjoying a moment together?" The tension in the air was palpable, and Joseph's determination was tested to the limit. In a desperate act, he managed to break free, leaving his cloak behind as he fled the room. But the woman, now filled with resentment, decided to use the cloak as evidence of his guilt. She screamed, calling the men of the house, and thus a false story began to spread. "This Hebrew tried to assault me," she exclaimed, showing the cloak to everyone. "He wanted to force me to do something shameful." When Potiphar returned and heard his wife's story, his heart was filled with a mix of anger and confusion. How could the young man he had trusted be capable of such betrayal? Potiphar felt betrayed on two levels, by Joseph's disloyalty and by his wife's manipulation. Joseph was imprisoned, his life changing drastically in an instant. He did not understand why he was being punished for his integrity, and the pain of injustice weighed heavily on his shoulders. In the cold cell, Joseph reflected on his life and what had happened. He wondered if he would ever be free again, and if he would see his dream come true. In this moment of reflection and despair, the future seemed bleak, but Joseph's resilience began to shine through the darkness. The darkness of the prison seemed to consume Joseph. He spent his days uncertain of what would happen next, his hope almost extinguished. Yet, even in the most challenging circumstances, Joseph held on to his faith and trust in God. The memory of the promises he once received in his dreams sustained him. He recalled how, as a child, he had dreamed that his brothers bowed down before him. Now, he was far from his family, living a reality that seemed completely opposite to that vision. It was during this dark period that something extraordinary happened. One day, while Joseph was in his cell, two prisoners were brought to the same prison, the Pharaoh's cupbearer and the baker. Both were disturbed and restless, for they had dreams they could not understand. Observing the sadness on their faces, Joseph approached them and asked, "Why are you so downcast?" The cupbearer, relieved to find someone who cared, shared his dream. I dreamed that there was a vine before me, and on it were 3 branches. They budded, blossomed, and produced grapes. Then I squeezed them into the cup of Pharaoh. Joseph, inspired, replied, "The interpretation of your dream is this. In 3 days Pharaoh will restore you to your position, and you will again serve Pharaoh." The cupbearer was radiant with the good news, but before he could leave the cell, Joseph asked, "When you are restored, remember me and speak to Pharaoh about me, so that I may be released from this prison." Then the baker, filled with hope, shared his dream as well. "I dreamed that I had 3 baskets of bread on my head, and birds were eating the bread from the top basket." Joseph's expression changed as he interpreted this dream. "In 3 days, Pharaoh will hang you, and the birds will eat your flesh." The baker, terrified, did not realize that his fate was sealed. 3 days passed, and, just as Joseph had predicted, the cupbearer was restored to his position, while the baker met his tragic end. However, the cupbearer, immersed in his own happiness, forgot to mention Joseph to Pharaoh. Time went by, and Joseph's situation seemed hopeless. He remained in prison, but his unwavering faith and integrity shone through, even in the face of adversity. Little did he know that a new event was about to change the course of his life once again. On a sunny morning, Pharaoh had a troubling dream that no one could interpret. The cupbearer, finally remembering Joseph, hurried to tell Pharaoh about the young Hebrew who had the gift of interpreting dreams. This news would reach Potiphar, and Joseph's life would change forever. After being summoned into the presence of Pharaoh, Joseph presented himself with a calm demeanor, despite the storm brewing within him. He knew this was his chance for redemption, and possibly to change his life. As he entered the throne room, Joseph felt the weight of Pharaoh's authority, but also the pressure of representing not only himself, but all the Hebrews. He took a deep breath and prepared for the battle ahead. "We have heard that you are able to interpret dreams," said Pharaoh, looking directly into Joseph's eyes. "I had a dream that troubles me, and no one can tell me what it means." "It is not I, but God who gives the interpretations," Joseph replied humbly. "Tell me your dream." Pharaoh then described his visions: 7 healthy and robust cows being devoured by 7 thin and sickly cows. Next, he dreamed of ears of grain, where 7 full ears were swallowed by 7 withered ears. Joseph listened attentively and at the end said, "This is the meaning of your dreams. God has revealed to Pharaoh what is about to happen. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 full ears represent 7 years of abundance in Egypt, followed by 7 years of severe famine." Pharaoh was impressed by the clarity of the interpretation and Joseph's wisdom, but that was not all Joseph had to offer. He continued, "Now, Pharaoh should choose a wise and discerning man to manage the land during the years of abundance, so that Egypt can be prepared for the famine." Pharaoh, surprised and delighted by Joseph's wisdom, decided that he would be the man to lead this monumental task. In the blink of an eye, Joseph, the Hebrew slave, was elevated to the position of governor of Egypt. He received a new name, a signet ring, and fine garments, symbolizing his new status. As he took control, Joseph remembered his family, his brothers, and his father. Though he was in a position of power, the longing and pain from the betrayal of his brothers still weighed on his heart. However, he also knew he needed to focus on his new responsibilities. The years of abundance passed quickly, and Joseph distinguished himself as a wise and efficient leader. He established granaries to store grain during the years of plenty, preparing Egypt for the impending crisis. His leadership not only saved the country, but also attracted people from afar, including his own family, who were on the brink of starvation in the land of Canaan. During this time of growth and overcoming challenges, Joseph transformed from an innocent young man into a strong and wise leader. His journey had shaped him, and he learned to cope with the pain of betrayal and the ache of longing, finding strength in his faith. The years of famine finally arrived, and the situation in Canaan grew increasingly desperate. Joseph's brothers, hearing about Egypt, where there was an abundance of grain, decided to travel there in search of food. As they approached the city, they had no idea that the man who would attend to them was none other than Joseph, the very brother they had sold into slavery years ago. When the brothers stood before Joseph, he was now in a position of power, dressed in fine garments and holding the authority of a ruler. However, the memory of past wounds haunted him. He observed them carefully, trying to control his emotions. Their hearts were heavy with remorse, but they still did not recognize the brother they had betrayed. "Where do you come from?" Joseph asked, his voice firm but his heart raced. The brothers, fearful, replied that they were sons of Canaan, seeking food. Joseph, keeping his identity a secret, decided to test them. "You are spies. You have come to see the weakness of Egypt," he accused them. The brothers, desperate, tried to defend themselves, claiming they were honest men and that they had a younger brother at home with their father. The tension in the air was palpable, and the sense of betrayal hung between them. Joseph, making a drastic decision, demanded that one of the brothers stay as a prisoner while the others returned to Canaan to bring back their younger brother Benjamin. He wanted to know if they had changed, if they were still the men who had betrayed him, or if there was hope for them. When the brothers left Egypt, the anguishing memory of their past actions began to haunt them. In an emotionally charged conversation, they expressed their regret. "This is what happens because of what we did to Joseph," one of them said, recalling the pain they had caused. "God is punishing us." Meanwhile, Joseph was left alone, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. He wanted to reveal his true identity, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to face what that meant. Love and pain intertwined in his heart, creating an emotional storm. He knew there were still issues to resolve and needed to see if his brothers were trustworthy. Finally, Benjamin and the brothers returned to Egypt, bringing proof that they were telling the truth. The tension escalated as Joseph prepared for the final confrontation. He organized a banquet at his house where everyone sat at the table. Joseph's heart raced as he looked at his brothers. The moment of truth was approaching. When the brothers finished eating, Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. With tears in his eyes and a choked voice, he finally revealed himself. "It is I, Joseph, the brother you sold." Shock and disbelief filled the room. The silence was deafening. Emotions exploded. Fear, guilt, and regret flooded the hearts of the brothers. "Joseph, we don't know what to say," one of them stammered, fearing for his life. But Joseph, amidst his tears, replied, "Do not be afraid. God used this for good. I am who I am today because of what happened." After the revelation of his identity, the room was filled with a dense emotion. Joseph's brothers, initially paralyzed by fear, began to understand the depth of what was happening. Joseph was no longer the vulnerable young man they had betrayed. He was a powerful man who had overcome unimaginable adversities. "Please, come closer," Joseph said, his voice filled with compassion. "I hold no grudges. I have forgiven you." He embraced each of them, easing the tension that hung in the air. The weight of past choices began to dissipate, and the brothers felt relieved to see that forgiveness was real. Joseph continued, "God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. Now come, bring my father and all the family. Egypt will have abundance for you." Joy filled everyone's hearts as they prepared to reunite the family. The reunion was not just about food, it was a chance to heal the wounds of the past. Upon returning to Canaan, the brothers brought the good news to Jacob, their father. He could hardly believe it. His mind was filled with doubts, but joy filled his heart when he learned that his beloved son was still alive. He and his family immediately set out for Egypt, where they were warmly received by Joseph with hugs and tears of joy. The following days were filled with celebrations, reunions, and reconciliations. Joseph introduced his family to Pharaoh, who welcomed them generously. The time of suffering and separation had finally given way to a new chapter of hope and unity. Joseph's life transformed into a powerful testimony of redemption and forgiveness. He had learned that even in the midst of pain, God had a plan. The story of his life became a legacy of overcoming challenges, showing that adversities can be transformed into blessings. As the years passed, Joseph became an important figure in Egypt, but he never forgot his roots. He always spoke of God's faithfulness and the importance of forgiveness. At the end of his life, he made a promise to his brothers, "God will surely visit you, and when that happens, take my bones back to Canaan." This promise reinforced the hope for a better future. The story of Potiphar and Joseph teaches us about the power of forgiveness, the importance of family, and how faith can guide us through the storms of life. If you enjoyed this touching story, don't forget to leave a like, share your reflections in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Your interaction is very important to us. And remember, there is always light after darkness.